December 16, 1942. Ledo, Assam Province, India. The rain hammers down like a judgment. Colonel Lewis Pick stands at the edge of what the British call the Road Head, a pretentious name for a muddy clearing where the last semblance of civilization surrenders to the jungle. Water streams off the brim of his campaign hat, and his boots are already swallowed to the ankles in clay that has the consistency of wet cement and the grip of quicksand. Beyond the clearing, the Patkai Range rises like a green wall, its slopes vanishing into clouds that seem to boil up from the earth itself. Pick is 47 years old, an engineer by training and a builder by nature. He's driven here from headquarters with General Joseph Joe Stilwell, and now both men are staring at the same impossibility. The jungle before them extends for 478 miles through the Patkai Mountains, across the Hukong Valley, over the spine of the Kumen Range, and finally down to Mongyu in Burma where it might, if God and engineering permit, connect with the old Burma Road and reopen the land route to China. The British say it can't be done, Stilwell says. His voice is a rasp, hardened by months of retreat through this same jungle when the Japanese drove the Allies out of Burma 6 months ago. They lost Burma in 42. Lost Singapore. Lost Malaya. Now they're telling me we can't build a road. Pick doesn't respond immediately. He's calculating. The monsoon season here lasts 8 months. The mountains ahead rise to 4,500 feet, covered in triple-canopy jungle so thick that aerial reconnaissance is nearly useless. There are no villages, no infrastructure, nothing but leeches, malaria, typhus, and reportedly, Japanese patrols. The British tried to hold this region and failed. Their engineers surveyed a route in the 1930s and concluded it was impossible. How many men do we have? Pick finally asks. 15,000 to start. More coming. Most of them engineers. Stilwell pauses. A lot of them are colored troops. The 45th, 823rd, 849th Engineer General Service Regiments. They've never built anything like this. Pick nods. He knows what Stilwell isn't saying, that the US Army, still segregated, has sent its African-American engineer units to this hellhole because white troops are prioritized for Europe. But Pick also knows that none of that matters if the road doesn't get built. China is dying. Since the Japanese took Burma and closed the Burma Road, the only supply route to Chiang Kai-shek's armies is by air over the hump. The Himalayas and plains can only carry so much. Tonnage wins wars, and right now, China is starving for it. When do we start? Pick asks. Now. Stilwell's face is granite. I don't care what the British say. I don't care if we have to carry every rock by hand. We're building this road, and we're getting supplies to China before the Japanese strangle them to death. The first survey team departs 3 days later. Lieutenant James Walsh leads 30 men from the 45th Engineer General Service Regiment into the jungle at dawn on December 19. Walsh is 26, from Chicago, and this is his first command in a combat zone. His men are mostly from the South Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and they've been in India for 6 weeks, long enough to understand that this country will kill you in ways they never imagined back home. The jungle swallows them within 100 yards of the clearing. The trees here are massive, their trunks wrapped in vines as thick as a man's arm, their canopy so dense that even at midday the light is green and submarine. The air is a physical presence, 95 degrees and 100% humidity, pressing against their lungs with every breath. Within an hour, every man is soaked through with sweat, and the mosquitoes arrive in clouds so thick they have to breathe through their neckerchiefs. Private First Class Robert Johnson, the team surveyor, carries a transit and a Jacob staff tools that seem absurdly civilized in this place. He's trying to establish a bearing, but the jungle makes it nearly impossible. Visibility extends maybe 20 feet before everything dissolves into green chaos. They're cutting a survey line, hacking through undergrowth with machetes, but for every foot they advance, the jungle seems to close in behind them. Hold, Walsh calls, raising his fist. The column stops. There's a river ahead. Not on any map they have, but rivers don't care about maps. This one is maybe 50 feet across, flowing fast with brown water that carries entire trees along like toys. The banks are steep, covered in mud that looks like melted chocolate. Walsh can't see the bottom. The current is strong enough that he can hear it a deep, muscular roar. How deep you think? Sergeant Clayton Davis asks. Davis is 34, a veteran of peacetime engineer work in the Philippines. He has the scarred hands of a man who spent his life building things. Only one way to find out, Walsh says. They rig a rope across using their climbing equipment, anchoring it to trees on both banks. Johnson volunteers to cross first. He strips off his pack, keeping only his rifle, and steps into the water. It's immediately up to his chest. The current slams into him, and for a moment Walsh thinks they're going to lose him, but Johnson holds the rope and pushes forward. The water reaches his armpits, then starts to shallow. He makes the far bank and waves. It takes them 3 hours to get the entire team across. One man loses his footing and goes under, swept downstream 30 yards before his buddies can haul him back to the rope. He comes up coughing muddy water, eyes wide with panic. Walsh makes a note in his journal, river crossing, day 1. No bridges. Need to build one every mile. That night they camp on a ridge. The rain starts at sunset and doesn't stop. They rig their ponchos into makeshift shelters, but the water finds every gap, every seam. The jungle around them comes alive with sounds howler monkeys, something that might be a tiger, the constant drip and splash of water falling from 100 feet up. Johnson sits under his poncho, trying to keep his survey notes dry, and realizes that every calculation he's made today is probably wrong. The compass acts erratically here, possibly from iron deposits in the rock. The transit keeps fogging up. The maps they're working from are British, from 1939, and they're discovering that entire mountains are in the wrong place. How many miles we make today? Davis asks. Walsh checks his notes. 2. Maybe 2.5. 476 to go, Davis says. It's not a joke. By New Year's Day, 1943, Pick has 3 survey teams in the jungle and a growing sense of the enormity of what has been asked to do. Reports come back by runner every 3 days, and each one is worse than the last. The Patkai range isn't just steep, it's nearly vertical in places, with slopes that turn into waterfalls during the rain. The valleys between the ridges are swamps filled with waist-deep mud that can trap a man for hours. The rivers are unfordable without bridges, and there are dozens of them. Pick spreads the survey maps across the hood of his jeep at headquarters. Major General Raymond Wheeler, Stilwell's chief engineer, stands beside him. Wheeler has just flown in from New Delhi, and is reading the reports with increasing alarm. Lewis, Wheeler says carefully, the British surveyed this route in 38. They estimated it would take 7 years and cost more than it's worth. They had the same information we have now. The British don't have what we have, Pick says. Which is? No choice. Pick taps the map. China is dying. The hump can't carry enough tonnage. If we don't open a land route, Chiang collapses, and the Japanese get all of China's manpower and resources. That's 10 years of war in the Pacific instead of 5. Wheeler is quiet for a moment. He's a pragmatist, and he knows the politics. The Ledo Road is controversial even within the army. Critics call it Stilwell's Road, a vanity project for a general who can't admit defeat. The logistics are staggering. Every gallon of fuel, every bulldozer blade, every stick of dynamite has to be shipped from the United States, around the Cape of Good Hope or across the Pacific, then up through the Indian rail system to Ledo. The cost per mile is going to be astronomical. How many men are you going to need? Wheeler asks. Pick has done the math. 15,000 in the jungle. Another 10,000 in support. Engineers, medics, quartermaster, signal corps. We'll need to build supply depots every 50 miles, airfields for evacuation and supply drops, hospitals for the casualties. Casualties. Malaria, typhus, dysentery, scrub typhus, jungle rot, snakebite, tiger attacks, Japanese ambushes, and accidents with explosives. Pick's voice is flat. The British are calling this the death road. I think we can do better, but not by much. We're going to lose men, Ray. A lot of them. Wheeler looks at the map again. The route Pick has sketched in red pencil looks like a wound across the landscape. When can you start actual construction? We already have, Pick says. The 45th started clearing yesterday. We're going to work from both ends, one team pushing east from Ledo, another team working west from Mongyu once we take it back from the Japanese. If we move fast enough, we might link up before the monsoon season peaks. That's in April, Wheeler says. 3 months. Then we work through the monsoon, Pick says. We work through everything. Because the alternative is watching China fall. January 15, 1943. Mile 12, Ledo Road. The first bulldozer arrives on a flatbed truck, and the men of the 45th Engineer Regiment gather to watch it get unloaded. It's a Caterpillar D8, painted army olive drab, 20 tons of steel and diesel power. To these men, many of whom grew up on farms in the Depression, it looks like a machine from the future. Sergeant Thomas Wilson is designated as the primary operator. He's 32, from Alabama, and he learned to drive heavy equipment working WPA road projects in the 1930s. He climbs into the seat, starts the engine, and the jungle seems to wake up with the roar. Birds explode from the trees. Monkeys scatter, screaming. Wilson engages the blade and pushes forward. The dozer hits the wall of jungle bamboo, vines, trees as thick as telephone poles, and for a moment nothing happens. Then the vegetation starts to give way, slowly at first, then faster. The blade cuts a 20-foot swath, pushing everything before it into a tangled pile. Behind Wilson, a team with axes and saws moves in to cut up the larger trees. Another team with machetes clears the undergrowth. A third team with shovels and picks levels the grade. This is the system Pick has designed: dozers to clear, axes to cut, picks to level, and behind them all, a gravel train. The road has to be 18 feet wide, capable of handling supply trucks in both directions. It has to have a crushed rock base or the monsoon will turn it into a river. It has to have drainage culverts every 100 yards or the water will undercut the foundation. And it has to be built at a rate of at least 1 mile per day or they'll never finish before the war ends. Wilson makes it 50 yards before the dozer bogs down. The ground here isn't soil, it's clay mixed with decomposed vegetation, and it has no bottom. The dozer sinks to its treads, engine roaring, blade pushing nothing but mud. Shut it down. Davis yells. Shut it down before you bury it. They spend the next 6 hours digging the dozer out. They cut logs from the jungle and lay them under the treads, creating a corduroy base. They use winches and cables, anchoring them to trees, and slowly, foot by foot, they drag the machine back to solid ground. By the time they're finished, it's dark, and Wilson sits on the ground, too exhausted to move. How far we get today? Someone asks. 50 yards, Davis says. At this rate, we'll finish sometime in 1960. But Pick has already thought of that. The next day, 3 more dozers arrive. Then 10 more. By the end of January, there are 25 bulldozers working the road, spaced out at intervals, each one pushing forward, creating a chain of clearings that slowly, painfully, extends east into the mountains. Behind them, the gravel trains follow dump trucks hauling rock from quarries they're blasting out of the mountainsides, spreading it, compacting it, building the road foot by foot. And still, they're only making about half a mile per day. The British were right about one thing: this is impossible. But impossibility, Pick is learning, is just another engineering problem. You break it down into smaller problems. You solve them one at a time. You don't think about the 450 miles ahead. You think about the next 100 feet. On January 28, Lieutenant Walsh's survey team reaches mile 20, and Walsh stops at the top of a ridge to look back. Behind him, like a scar through the green, is the road. It's narrow, rough, barely more than a path, but it's there. He can see smoke from the base camp at Ledo, 15 miles back. He can see the supply trucks crawling along like insects. He writes in his journal that night, "We are building a road through hell. But it's our road. And it's going to China." February 9, 1943. Mile 27, Ledo Road. Private First Class William Henderson wakes to the sound of rain on canvas and the certainty that something is wrong with his body. He's been feeling off for 2 days, tired, achy, dismissing it as the normal exhaustion of 12-hour shifts on the road. But this morning his head pounds like someone is driving spikes through his temples, and when he tries to sit up, the world tilts sideways. "You look like death," says Corporal Marcus Reed, who shares the tent. Reed is already dressed, lacing his boots. Outside, it's barely light, the jungle wrapped in mist. "I'm fine," Henderson says, but his voice sounds wrong, hollow. He's 19, from Detroit, and he's been with the 823rd Engineered General Service Regiment for 8 months. He's learned to drive a dump truck, to operate a jackhammer, to sleep in mud. He can handle this. He makes it through breakfast-powdered eggs and hardtack and climbs into his truck for the morning supply run. The road is a nightmare after last night's rain, more river than road, and he has to keep the truck in first gear, nursing it through mud holes that could swallow the wheels. By the time he reaches the forward camp at mile 35, his vision is blurring. Captain Arthur Hayes, the battalion medical officer, takes one look at Henderson and pulls him off the truck. "You're burning up. How long have you felt like this?" "Just today, sir." Hayes takes his temperature. It's 104. "You've got malaria. When's the last time you took your Atabrin?" Henderson tries to remember. The Atabrin tablets, bitter yellow pills that turn your skin jaundiced, are supposed to be taken daily, but half the men skip them because of the side effects. "Last week, maybe."
Jesus Christ.
Hayes signals for a medic. "Get him to the clearing station. Now." The clearing station is 10 miles back, a collection of tents with red crosses painted on the roofs. By the time they get Henderson there, he's delirious, shaking with fever despite the heat. The doctor's 2 captains from the medical corps who look exhausted themselves start him on quinine. But they're not optimistic. "This is the 3rd case today," one of them tells Hayes. "We had 15 yesterday. The mosquitoes here carry Plasmodium falciparum, the deadly strain. If we don't get this under control, we're going to lose more men to disease than we could to combat." Henderson survives, but is evacuated to a hospital in Ledo and won't return to the road for 6 weeks. By then, the 823rd has lost 43 men to malaria. The 45th has lost 62. The 849th, which arrived in January, has lost 38 and hasn't even reached the forward areas yet. Pick reads the casualty reports in his headquarters tent and feels something cold settle in his chest. They're not even 30 miles into the jungle, and disease is tearing through the engineer battalions like fire through dry grass. February 20th, 1943. Ledo Base Camp. The African American engineer regiments weren't supposed to be here. In the U.S. Army's grand strategy, they were designated for support roles, building airfields in rear areas, maintaining supply depots, doing the grunt work that white combat units couldn't be bothered with. But the Ledo Road is different. There are no rear areas here. Every mile of the road is in what the Army classifies as a combat zone, and the Japanese are close enough that patrols hear them moving through the jungle at night. Colonel Pick doesn't care about the Army's racial politics. He cares about whether men can build roads, and the 45th, 823rd, and 849th have proven they can. But now he's watching them die, and not from enemy action. He calls a meeting of all battalion commanders and medical officers. They gather in the mess tent, a dozen men standing around a map table, smoking, sweating in the oppressive heat. "Gentlemen," Pick begins, "at our current rate of medical evacuation, we will run out of healthy engineers by June. That is unacceptable. I need solutions." Captain Hayes speaks first. "Sir, the problem is prophylaxis. The men aren't taking their Atabrin because they don't understand what happens if they don't. They think malaria is like a bad cold. They don't know it can kill them or cripple them for life." "Then make them understand," Pick says. "We need to make Atabrin mandatory," Hayes continues. "Daily formations, supervised dosing. Anyone who refuses goes on report. And we need to spray DDT on every camp, every worksite, every square foot of this road." Major Samuel Freeman, commanding the 849th, raises his hand. "Sir, we also need better living conditions. Right now my men are sleeping in tents on bare ground. The water table is 6 inches down. They're sleeping in pools of water where mosquitoes breed. We need elevated floors, better drainage, screened tents. We need a lot of things," Pick says. "But what we have is what we have. We can't wait for perfect conditions. We work with what we've got and we adapt. Then we need more medical personnel," Hayes presses. We have 1 doctor for every 1,000 men. That's barely enough for routine care, let alone a malaria epidemic. And we need field hospitals forward, not just clearing stations. Men are dying in transport. Pick makes notes. I'll request more doctors. But I can't promise they'll send them. Meanwhile, we enforce Atterbury discipline, we spray DDT, and we keep building. Because if we stop, China falls. Is that understood? There's a murmur of assent, but Pick can see the doubt in their faces. These are good officers, competent engineers, but they're watching their men sicken and die, and morale is starting to crack. After the meeting, Pick walks to the cemetery. It's a small clearing a quarter mile from camp, marked with white crosses. There are already 28 graves here, and more being dug. Most of the markers read malaria, or typhus, or dysentery. A few say accident, men killed by falling trees, crushed by bulldozers, blown apart by misfired explosives. General Stilwell finds him there an hour later. Stilwell looks worse than Pick has ever seen him, gaunt, grey, his uniform hanging loose. He's been in Burma, trying to coordinate with the British and Chinese forces for an offensive to retake northern Burma and protect the road's eastern terminus. How bad? Stilwell asks, looking at the graves. Bad enough, Pick says. We're losing men faster than I can replace them. At this rate, the road is going to cost us a man per mile. Maybe more. The British are calling it the man-a-mile road, Stilwell says. They think we're idiots for trying. Are we? Stilwell is quiet for a long moment. I don't know, Lewis. Maybe. But we're committed now. We're either going to build this road or die trying. And I'm too damn stubborn to do the latter. March 12, 1943. Mile 47, Hukong Valley. The road has reached the valley floor, and Sergeant Wilson discovers a new kind of hell. The Hukong Valley is a floodplain, 50 miles wide, covered in elephant grass that grows 10 feet tall and swamp that extends as far as he can see. During the dry season, which ended 2 months ago, the valley is passable. During the monsoon, it becomes an inland sea. Wilson is leading a convoy of 3 bulldozers and 2 graders across what's supposed to be solid ground. The lead dozer sinks immediately, mud oozing over the treads like tar. He signals a halt and dismounts to probe the ground ahead with a long pole. It goes down 6 feet before hitting anything solid. We can't build on this, says Sergeant Davis, who's come forward from the second dozer. There's no bottom. We put road on this, it'll sink by morning. Then we make a bottom, Wilson says. They spend the next 3 weeks creating what the engineers call a corduroy road, thousands of logs cut from the jungle, laid perpendicular to the road direction, bound together with wire, covered with gravel. It's back-breaking work. The logs have to be cut to 18-foot lengths, dragged through the swamp by elephants leased from local Kachin tribes, laid precisely, secured, and covered before the next rain turns everything to soup. The elephants are a revelation. Indian elephants, smaller than their African cousins but smarter, they can navigate the swamp where trucks and dozers bog down. Their handlers mahouts are Kachin men who've worked in the teak industry for generations. They speak no English, but they understand engineering better than most of the American soldiers. One mahout, a weathered man the Americans call Charlie because they can't pronounce his Kachin name, shows Wilson a technique for building stable foundations in swamp. He has his elephant wade into the deepest mud, then uses the elephant's weight to compress the ground, creating a solid platform. Its slower elephant can only compress about 20 square feet per hour, but it works. How long you do this? Wilson asks through a translator. 20 years, Charlie says. Build roads for British. 4 teak companies. This road. He gestures at the swamp. Very bad. Many men die here. How many? Charlie shrugs. All roads cost lives. This one cost many. By April, the road is at mile 61, and the death toll has reached 53. But now there's a new problem, the Japanese. April 8, 1943. Mile 65, forward camp. The attack comes at dawn. Private George Wilson, no relation to Sergeant Thomas Wilson, is on latrine duty, 100 yards from the main camp, when he hears the first shots. They're sharp cracks, different from the American M1S, and they're coming from the tree line. Wilson doesn't think. He runs, crashing through the undergrowth, yelling, "Japs! Japs in the wire!" The camp erupts. Men tumble out of tents, grabbing rifles, trying to find cover. Captain Frank Morrison, commanding C Company of the 45th, is running toward the perimeter when he sees them Japanese soldiers, maybe 20 of them, emerging from the jungle. They're wearing mottled green uniforms, carrying Arisaka rifles, and they're firing as they come. Morrison drops behind a bulldozer and starts shooting. Around him, his men are doing the same, and the camp becomes a chaos of gunfire and shouting. The Japanese are disciplined, moving in fire teams, using the jungle as cover. But they're also outnumbered. The engineers might not be infantry, but they're still soldiers, and they're fighting for their lives. The firefight lasts 15 minutes. When it's over, 5 Japanese soldiers are dead, the rest have melted back into the jungle, and the engineers have 3 wounded, none seriously. Morrison walks the perimeter, checking his men, and finds where the Japanese penetrated. They cut through the wire sometime in the night, crept to within 50 yards of the camp, and waited for first light. "Why didn't they hit us harder?" asks Lieutenant William Crawford. 20 men? That's not an assault. That's a probe. "They're testing us," Morrison says. "Seeing how we react. Next time, there'll be more of them." He's right. Over the next month, Japanese patrols harass the road construction at irregular intervals. They never hit the same spot twice. They attack at dawn, at dusk, at midnight. They ambush supply convoys on the road. They snipe at bulldozer operators from the tree line. They plant booby-trap sharpened bamboo stakes hidden in the trail, grenades rigged to tripwires. The engineers learn to work with infantry protection. The 1st Battalion, 475th Infantry Regiment Merrill's Marauders sends squads to guard the construction sites. They teach the engineers basic infantry tactics, fields of fire, interlocking coverage, night perimeter defense. But the Marauders are overstretched themselves, fighting to clear the road ahead, and they can't be everywhere. On May 3rd, a Japanese patrol hits a work crew at mile 72. Corporal James Tucker, operating a bulldozer, sees them coming and tries to reverse, but the dozer is slow, and the Japanese are fast. They pour fire into the cab. Tucker takes 3 rounds, slumps over the controls, and the dozer rolls forward, pushing blindly into the jungle until it hits a tree and stops. His crew chief, Sergeant Henry Phillips, drags Tucker from the cab under fire. Tucker is still alive, bleeding from wounds in his chest and arm. Phillips carries him 200 yards to the aid station, but Tucker dies before the medics can stabilize him. He's the 54th casualty. The road is at mile 72. The mathematics are becoming inescapable. May 20th, 1943. Mile 89, Turning Point Ridge. The monsoon arrives in full force. It doesn't start gradually one day, it's hot and humid. The next day the sky opens and doesn't close. The rain comes in sheets, in torrents, in volumes that seem physically impossible. Visibility drops to 20 feet. The road becomes a river. The camps become islands. And still, Pick orders them to keep building. Lieutenant John Morgan, attached to the 823rd, writes in a letter to his wife, "We are working in conditions that would stop construction in any civilized country. The rain is constant, the mud is everywhere, and the jungle is trying to reclaim every foot we've built. But Colonel Pick won't stop. He says if we stop, the road is finished. So we keep going, even though it feels like we're trying to hold back the ocean with a shovel." The bulldozers work in water up to their axles. The trucks slide off the road, tumble down embankments, get stuck in sinkholes. The men work in rain gear that's useless after an hour, their skin turning white and wrinkled, fungal infections spreading in every fold and crevice. At night, in the tents, they strip off their boots and pour water out. Some men's feet are so infected they can't wear boots anymore, they wrap them in rags and keep working. The supply line is breaking down. Trucks can't make it through the mud. What takes 2 hours in dry weather takes 8 in the monsoon. Fuel runs low. Food runs low. Medical supplies run low. Pick organizes mule trains to supplement the trucks, but the mules are dying too from exhaustion, from disease, from sheer misery. On May 27th, A mudslide buries 100 yards of road at mile 82. The men spend 3 days digging it out, only to have another slide bury it again. Pick flies up in a small observation plane to survey the damage and realizes they're fighting a losing battle. The mountains are saturated, unstable. Every ridge is a potential avalanche of mud. He lands back at headquarters and makes a decision that will define the road. They're going to have to change the route. Instead of following the valley floors where the flooding is worst, they'll build along the ridgelines, even though it means steeper grades and more blasting. It'll be harder in the short term, but it's the only way to keep the road from washing away every monsoon season. The engineers greet this news with exhausted resignation. Building on ridgelines means cutting terraces into mountainsides. It means hauling tons of rock uphill. It means every foot of progress requires 3 times the work. But they do it, because the alternative is watching their work dissolve into the mud. By June, the death toll has reached 78. The road is at mile 103. They're losing a man every 1.3 miles now, and the worst terrain is still ahead. In his journal that night, Pick writes, "The British were right to call this impossible. But impossible is a relative term. We're learning that impossible just means expensive in time, in resources, and in lives. The question is whether the price is worth paying." Stilwell says yes. Washington says yes. I say yes, because I have to. But I wonder if the men in the mud, the ones burying their friends, would agree. I wonder if we have the right to make this choice for them. He never writes that question in any official report. But it haunts him every morning when he walks past the cemetery and counts the new crosses. July 14, 1943. Mile 127. Tonnage River crossing. The Tonnage River shouldn't exist. At least not the way Corporal David Chen finds it when his survey team reaches what their maps show as a minor stream. Instead, there's a raging torrent 200 feet wide, brown with silt, carrying trees and debris that tumble past like battering rams. The sound is a continuous roar that makes conversation impossible at less than shouting distance. Chen is from San Francisco, one of the few Chinese-American engineers assigned to the road. He's here because someone in personnel thought a Chinese name meant he could speak Chinese. He can't. He's third generation, but he's stayed because he's good at math and because he understands that this road might be the only thing keeping his parents' homeland from complete collapse. Major Robert Thompson, the battalion engineer, stands beside Chen at the water's edge. Thompson is looking at the problem with the expression of a man who's run out of surprise. Nothing about this road has been simple. Nothing has matched the surveys. The Tonnage River is supposed to be 30 feet wide and 3 feet deep at this time of year. Instead, it's swollen with monsoon runoff, and Chen estimates the current at 15 miles per hour fast enough to tear a man off his feet and sweep him downstream to his death. How do we bridge this? Thompson asks. Chen is calculating. The Army's standard Bailey bridge panels can span 60 feet, maybe 90 if they double them up. But 200 feet requires something else entirely. We'll need a pier in the middle, sir. Maybe 2. And we'll need to sink them deep. The riverbed here is probably sand and gravel, easy to undercut. How long? A month, if we're lucky. 2 if we're not. Thompson looks upstream, downstream, as if a better answer might present itself. It doesn't. Start designing. We'll get the steel and pile-driving equipment up here within the week. But getting anything up here is becoming the real challenge. The road behind them is technically open, but open is a generous description. Landslides block it every few days. The corduroy sections sink and have to be rebuilt. The drainage culverts, those that haven't been washed away, are constantly clogged with debris. Supply convoys that should take 6 hours are taking 2 days. And every delay means the men at the forward camps go without food, fuel, medicine. July 22, 1943. Mile 132. Forward Medical Station. Captain Hayes stands in what passes for an operating theatre A tent with screened sides, a wooden table, and equipment that would be considered obsolete in any stateside hospital. On the table is Private Lawrence Washington, 22 years old, from Birmingham, Alabama. Washington's leg is a mess. 3 days ago, a cable snapped while they were winching a stuck bulldozer, and the cable whipped back and caught Washington across the calf. The wound is deep, down to the bone, and despite Hayes's best efforts, Infection has set in. Hayes can smell it, the sweet, rotten odor of necrotic tissue. Washington's fever is 103 degrees and climbing. Without aggressive intervention, he'll be dead within 48 hours. We have to take the leg, Hayes tells his assistant, Lieutenant Edward Morrison, a young doctor from Boston who's been in India for 4 months and still looks shocked by everything he sees. Can't we try more sulfur drugs? Morrison asks. We've been trying for 3 days. Look at it. Hayes pulls back the bandage. The wound is black at the edges, red and inflamed around the periphery. Red streaks are climbing up Washington's thigh, blood poisoning, spreading toward his heart. If we don't amputate now, he dies. If we wait until tomorrow, he dies. This is the decision. Morrison nods slowly. He's learning that medicine in the jungle is different from medicine in Boston. Here, there are no specialists to consult, no laboratory tests to run, no margin for error. You make the best decision you can with what you have, and you live with the consequences. They operate that afternoon. Hayes amputates below the knee, working quickly because they have to conserve their limited anesthetic supply. Washington survives the surgery, and 2 days later he's evacuated to Ledo, then back to a hospital in India, then eventually home. He's one of the lucky ones, he lives. But he's also one of the casualties that doesn't show up in the killed in action statistics. He's just one more man who gave a piece of himself to the road. By the end of July, Hayes has performed 11 amputations. He's treated 347 cases of malaria, 156 of dysentery, 89 of typhus, 43 of scrub typhus, and dozens of cases of diseases he can't even identify: tropical fevers that burn through men in days, fungal infections that eat away at flesh, parasitic infections that leave men skeletal and shaking. His field hospital has 20 beds and usually holds 35 patients. Men sleep on the ground, under the beds, anywhere there's space. How many can we save? Morrison asks one night. Hayes is too tired to soften the truth. Not enough. We're doing our best, but our best isn't good enough. We need a real hospital, not a tent. We need more doctors, more medicine, more of everything. But what we need and what we get are two different things. So we just keep watching them die. No, Hayes says. We keep fighting. We keep saving the ones we can. And we try not to think too hard about the ones we can't. August 5, 1943. Mile 141. Pangsao Pass. The road is climbing now, switchbacking up the southern slopes of the Patkai Range toward Pangsao Pass, the gateway between India and Burma. This is the route the refugees took in 1942 when the Japanese conquered Burma. Tens of thousands of Indians and Anglo-Indians, fleeing on foot, dying by the hundreds from disease, exhaustion, and starvation. The jungle on either side of the road still contains their bones. Sergeant Wilson is driving his bulldozer up a grade that would be considered too steep for a paved highway, let alone a construction road in active monsoon. The dozer lurches, treads grinding for purchase on wet clay. Behind him, a road grader is trying to smooth what Wilson clears, but it's a losing battle. The rain cuts channels in the fresh-cut road faster than they can grade it. At 2:47 p.m., Wilson's dozer reaches a section of road that looks solid but isn't. The subsurface has been undermined by water, creating a cavity. When Wilson's 20-ton machine rolls over it, the road collapses. The dozer tilts, tips, and starts to roll sideways toward the cliff edge. Wilson has maybe 2 seconds to react. He throws himself clear, hitting the ground hard, rolling. Behind him, the bulldozer goes over the edge, tumbling down the mountainside, crashing through trees, metal screaming against rock. It falls 300 feet before slamming into a boulder field at the bottom of the ravine. Wilson lies on the muddy road, breathing hard, checking himself for injuries. Nothing broken. Just bruises and scrapes. He walks to the edge and looks down at the wrecked dozer. It's mangled, destroyed, 20 tons of twisted metal that represented 3 months of shipping and $20,000 of army equipment. Captain Morrison arrives 10 minutes later, sees the wreck, and says, "Jesus Christ, Wilson. You okay?" "Yeah, sir. But the dozer isn't." Morrison looks at the destroyed machine, then at Wilson, then back at the machine. You know what Colonel Pick is going to say about this? That we need to be more careful. That we need to work faster, Morrison says. Because losing equipment means delays, and delays mean more men in the jungle during the next monsoon season. Come on. Let's get back to camp and report this. And Wilson. Sir. You're alive. That's what matters. We can replace bulldozers. We can't replace you. But the reality is that replacing bulldozers is almost as hard as replacing men. Every piece of heavy equipment has to be shipped from the United States, through the Panama Canal or around Africa, across the Indian Ocean, up through Calcutta, and then transported by rail to Ledo. The pipeline takes 4 to 6 months. When a dozer goes over a cliff, they can't just order a new one and have it show up next week. They have to make do with what they have, work longer hours, push the remaining machines harder. Over the next 3 months, they lose 8 more bulldozers to accidents, to mechanical failure, to terrain that even steel and diesel can't conquer. By October, they're cannibalizing parts from wrecked machines to keep the working ones operational. Every functioning dozer is operating 18 hours a day, until the engines start to fail from sheer exhaustion. September 18, 1943. Mile 167, Xingbuyang. The 45th Engineer Regiment establishes a forward base at Xingbuyang, a village that once housed a few hundred Kachin families and now hosts 3,000 American soldiers, plus the local population who've decided that the Americans who pay for labor and don't loot are preferable to either the British or Japanese. Private Eddie Jackson, 19 years old, from Georgia, is part of the detail building a storage depot for fuel and ammunition. It's dangerous work. One spark, one mistake, and the whole depot could go up. But Jackson is careful, methodical, and has never had an accident. Until September 18th. He's moving 55-gallon drums of aviation fuel, rolling them off a truck, when one of the drums slips. It's not his fault the wooden ramp is slick with rain, but the drum gets away from him. It rolls, picks up speed, slams into another drum, and both go tumbling down an embankment. Jackson hears them crash in the ravine below. Hears the metal rupture. And then, inexplicably, he sees flame. The fire spreads faster than he thought possible. Fuel splashing across the ravine, igniting, climbing back up the embankment. Jackson runs, screaming warnings. Men scatter. The flames reach the storage area where they've been stacking drums, hundreds of them. Enough fuel to keep the road running for a month, and the first explosion is like the end of the world. Jackson is 50 yards away when the blast wave hits him, throwing him forward, slamming him into the ground. He covers his head as debris rains down metal, wood, chunks of earth. The secondary explosions come one after another, a chain reaction that turns the storage depot into an inferno. When it's over, 12 men are dead. 23 are wounded. And a month's worth of fuel is gone, burned, sending a pillar of black smoke into the sky that the Japanese can probably see from 100 miles away. Colonel Pick flies to Xingbuyang the next day. He walks through the wreckage with Jackson, who's in shock, barely speaking. Pick doesn't yell. He doesn't assign blame. He just looks at the devastation and says, "We'll rebuild. We'll get more fuel. We'll keep going." But privately, to his staff officers, Pick says what everyone is thinking: we're hemorrhaging resources. For every mile we build, we're losing men, equipment, and supplies at a rate that's unsustainable. At this rate, we'll spend more money and lives on this road than it would cost to double the air supply over the hump. But we're committed now. We can't stop. We can only push forward and hope we reach the end before we run out of everything. October 28, 1943. Mile 189, Jambu Bum Ridge. The road reaches the crest of Jambu Bum Ridge at 4,500 feet, and for the first time in 11 months, the men can see where they've been. Behind them, stretching into the haze, is the road, a thin line cutting through green, marked by the smoke from base camps, the glint of metal from equipment, the movement of supply trucks like ants crawling on string. Lieutenant Walsh stands at the crest with a new survey team. His original team from December, the 30 men who started this with him, has been reduced to 11. The rest have been evacuated for disease, injury, or exhaustion. Walsh himself has had malaria twice, and has lost 30 pounds. He looks gaunt, hollowed out, 20 years older than his actual age of 27. But he's still here. Still surveying. Still calculating grades and cuts and fills. Because someone has to, and he's one of the few who's been with the road from the beginning. How far? Asks Private James Murphy, the new surveyor. Murphy is fresh from stateside, only in India for 6 weeks, and he still has the clean-faced optimism of someone who hasn't watched this place break men. Walsh checks his notes. 189 miles from Ledo. Another 289 to Mongyu. If we maintain current pace, we'll reach Mongyu by, let's see, late 1945. That's 2 more years. Yes. Murphy is quiet, absorbing this. Lieutenant, how many men we lost so far? Walsh knows the number exactly. He's been keeping count, writing each name in his journal. 147. Plus another 300 evacuated permanently. And we're not even halfway. Jesus. He's not here, Walsh says. If he was, we wouldn't need this road. They start down the eastern slope of Jambu Bum, beginning the survey toward the next valley. The terrain ahead looks, if possible, worse than what they've crossed. More mountains. More rivers. More jungle that seems designed specifically to kill human ambition. That night, Walsh writes in his journal, we've reached the point where everyone understands what the British meant when they called this the man-a-mile road. Every mile costs us a man, sometimes more. We're building a monument to American determination, but it's paved with American graves. I wonder, years from now, if anyone will remember what we paid to build this. I wonder if anyone will care. November 15, 1943. Mile 201. Tarang Kar River. Corporal Chen's bridge over the Tanai River is finally complete, a Bailey bridge supported by 2 massive piers that took 6 weeks to sink into the riverbed using pile drivers that broke down constantly in the humidity and had to be repaired with scavenged parts. The bridge is a marvel of field engineering, strong enough to support loaded supply trucks, and it's only 3 weeks behind schedule. But 3 weeks means something different in the jungle. It means 3 more weeks of the monsoon working against them. 3 more weeks of men in the mud. 3 more weeks of malaria and dysentery and accidents. The celebration when the first truck crosses is muted. The men cheer, but it's tired cheering, the sound of people who've won a battle but know they're losing the war. They've built 1 bridge. There are 26 more rivers to cross before they reach Mongyu. Colonel Pick drives across the bridge in his jeep that afternoon. He stops in the middle, gets out, walks to the railing, and looks down at the water. The Tanai is still high, still fast, still dangerous. But there's a bridge over it now. Human beings looked at this obstacle and said no to nature. That has to count for something. Major Thompson finds him there. Sir, we just got the casualty report from last week. Pick doesn't want to hear it, but he has to. How many? 13 dead. 42 evacuated. Most of it disease malaria, typhus, scrub fever. But we also lost 2 men to a Japanese patrol at mile 195. They hit a road crew, killed the 2 men, and disappeared before the guards could respond. Pick does the math in his head. They're at mile 201. They've lost 162 men killed, plus 384 evacuated permanently. That's 546 casualties for 201 miles. If the rate holds and it's actually getting worse, not better, they'll suffer 1,300 casualties before they reach Mongyu. Are we doing the right thing, Robert? Pick asks quietly. Thompson doesn't answer immediately. He's thinking about it, really thinking. Sir, I don't know if there's a right thing in war. There's just necessary things. Is this necessary? Stilwell thinks so. Washington thinks so. Whether they're correct, we won't know until the war is over and historians can look back with perfect hindsight. That's a politician's answer. Yes, sir. It is. Because that's the only honest answer I have. Pick nods slowly. Then we keep building. Because stopping now would mean all those casualties were for nothing, and I can't accept that. So we push forward, and we hope the end justifies the cost. He gets back in his jeep and drives toward the forward camp. Behind him, the Tanai River flows on, indifferent to the bridge that now spans it, indifferent to the men who built it, indifferent to everything but its own ancient journey to the sea. December 24, 1943. Mile 223, Christmas Eve. The men of the 823rd Engineer Regiment try to celebrate Christmas. Someone has scrounged a scraggly tree from the jungle. It's not a pine, it's some kind of tropical hardwood, but it's vaguely triangular and that's close enough. They decorate it with strips of aluminum foil from ration packages, with bits of colored paper, with anything that catches light. Private Henderson, recovered from his bout of malaria but 20 pounds lighter and permanently tired, helped set up a makeshift mess tent for Christmas dinner. The cooks have managed to produce something that's theoretically turkey. It might be, or it might be local fowl of some kind with powdered potatoes and gravy made from bouillon cubes. There's even canned cranberry sauce, which has been carefully rationed. Captain Hayes delivers a brief Christmas message before dinner. He's not religious, but he understands that these men need something to believe in beyond the mud and the road. "Gentlemen," he says, "we've had a hard year. We've lost friends. We've lost health. We've lost any illusions we might have had about easy victories. But we're still here. Still building. And that road behind us, that's ours. Nobody gave it to us. Nobody made it easy. We took it from the jungle foot by foot, and we'll keep taking it until we reach China. So tonight, let's remember the men who aren't here. Let's honor their sacrifice. And let's commit to finishing what they started." The men eat in relative silence. Christmas carols are sung, but they sound hollow in the jungle, competing with the sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Some men write letters home, though mail service is sporadic at best. Some just sleep, too exhausted for celebration. Henderson writes to his mother in Detroit, "Dear Mama, I hope you got my last letter and I hope this one reaches you before next Christmas. We're okay here. It's not like the movies, there's not much fighting, not like the guys in Europe or the Pacific. But it's hard in different ways. The jungle is trying to kill us every day, and some days it succeeds. But we're building something important. They tell us this road will save China. I hope that's true. I hope all of this means something. Love, William." He seals the letter and gives it to the mail clerk, knowing it might take 3 months to reach Detroit, if it reaches there at all. At midnight, someone sets off a flare against regulations, but no one stops him. The flare rises into the rainy sky, bursts red and green, and for 30 seconds the jungle is illuminated in Christmas colors. Then darkness returns, and the rain continues, and somewhere in the night a man screams nightmare, malaria dream, or actual danger, it's impossible to tell. The war goes on. The road goes on. And the cost keeps mounting, 1 man per mile, sometimes more, the arithmetic of sacrifice that's turning the Ledo Road into the most expensive project, per mile, in American military history. January 12, 1945. Mile 432, Mitkianabamo Road Junction. General Joseph Stilwell stands in the mud and watches history being made. 2 bulldozers, one coming from the west, one from the east, are closing the final gap in the Ledo Road. The eastern crew has been working backward from the old Burma Road, pushing through territory only recently retaken from the Japanese. The western crew has been driving forward from India for 26 months. The gap between them is now less than 50 feet. Colonel Pick is here, looking older than his 50 years, his uniform hanging loose on a frame that's lost 30 pounds. Beside him stands Major General Daniel Sultan, who replaced Stilwell as theater commander 3 months ago when political battles in Washington finally caught up with Vinegar Joe. But Stilwell insisted on being here for this moment. This is his road, his obsession, his vindication. At 3:47 p.m., the dozers meet. Their blades touch with a metallic clang that echoes across the valley. The operator Sergeant Thomas Wilson from the western crew, and a Chinese engineer named Lieutenant Zhong Wei from the eastern crew shut down their engines and climb from their machines. They shake hands in the sudden silence, and a photographer from the Army Signal Corps captures the moment. 432 miles. 26 months. 1,073 men dead from disease, accident, and enemy action. Another 1,234 evacuated permanently, broken by malaria, dysentery, and exhaustion. The arithmetic has held grimly constant, 2.4 men per mile, making the road's cost higher than any construction project in American history. But the road is open. India to China. The blockade is broken. Stilwell walks forward to shake hands with both men. His face is gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and vindication. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice rough with emotion, "you've just won the war in China. They don't know it yet in Washington, the doubters and the critics. But you've done what they said was impossible. You've built a road through hell, and now we're going to use it to send the Japanese back to their islands." Pick stands beside Stilwell, and for a moment he allows himself to feel something other than the constant pressure that's been crushing him for 2 years. Pride, maybe. Or just relief that it's finished. But then he looks at the road rutted, muddy, barely 18 feet wide in places and thinks about all the work still ahead. Opening the road is one thing. Keeping it open through another monsoon season is something else entirely. January 20th, 1945. Mile 1, Ledo Base. The first convoy is assembled at dawn. 35 trucks loaded with ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, and food, 113 tons of cargo destined for Kunming, China. It's a test run, partly symbolic, partly practical. The road is officially open, but nobody knows if it can actually support sustained traffic. Lieutenant Walsh, promoted to captain now, leads the convoy. He's been with the road since the first survey in December 1942, and Colonel Pick insisted he have the honor of leading the first trucks to China. Walsh stands beside his jeep at the head of the convoy, checking maps, checking watches, checking everything twice because failure now, after everything they've sacrificed, would be unbearable. The drivers are a mix of African American troops from the engineer regiments and Chinese soldiers trained by American advisors. Private Henderson is driving the third truck, a 2.5-ton GMC loaded with medical supplies. He's nervous, which seems absurd after 2 years in the jungle, but this is different. This is the moment when they find out if it was all worth it. At 6:15 a.m., Pick gives the signal. Walsh's jeep rolls forward. The convoy follows. The first 100 miles are through terrain the men know intimately, every bridge, every switchback, every mudhole that swallows trucks whole. They've maintained this section for 2 years, and it shows. The road is rough but passable. They make good time, averaging 15 miles per hour. Then they hit the Patkai range. The climbing switchbacks test every driver's skill. The grades are steep, 12% in places, which is barely safe for modern highways and borderline suicidal for 1940s trucks on mud roads. Henderson drops his truck into first gear, engine roaring, climbing foot by foot. Behind him, another truck's brakes fail on a descent. The driver manages to steer it into an embankment before it goes over the cliff, but the truck is wrecked, its cargo lost. They press on. At mile 127, they cross the Tanai River Bridge, Corporal Chen's masterpiece, still standing after 14 months. The trucks rumble across, the bridge swaying slightly under the weight, but holding. Chen, now a sergeant and still working on road maintenance, watches from the bank and allows himself a moment of satisfaction. His bridge works. All those weeks of labor, all those calculations made with a transit that fogged up in the humidity, they were worth it. By nightfall, the convoy reaches mile 223, the Christmas Eve camp. They bivouac there, posting guards, checking vehicles. 2 trucks have broken down. One through a rod, the engine seizing in a spray of oil and steam. Another's transmission failed on the mountain grades. Mechanics work through the night trying to repair them, but in the end they have to be abandoned. The convoy continues with 32 trucks. January 22nd, 1945. Mile 340, Bamo Plains. The convoy enters Burma proper, rolling through territory that was Japanese-controlled until 6 months ago. The landscape here is different, more open, less jungle-choked. Rice paddies stretch to the horizon, though most are abandoned, the villages empty or destroyed by 2 years of fighting. They pass through Meticulously, the critical airfield town that Stilwell's forces captured in August 1944 after a brutal 3-month siege. The town is a ruin, shattered buildings, burnt-out tanks, shell craters everywhere. But the airfield is operational, and C-47 cargo planes are taking off and landing constantly, still flying supplies over the hump because the road isn't yet proven reliable. Captain Hayes, who's traveling with the convoy as medical officer, stops at the Meticulously Field Hospital. It's a real building now, not a tent, with actual operating theaters and recovery wards. He finds several men he evacuated months ago, working as orderlies and administrators. They've recovered enough to return to limited duty, though none will ever be the men they were before the jungle took its piece of them. How many made it? Asks Corporal Williams, who lost his leg to infection back in July 1943. He's walking on a prosthetic now, working as a supply clerk. Made it where? Hayes asks. All the way. How many men who started on the road are still there? Hayes does the math. Of the 15,000 men who started construction in January 1943, maybe 3,000 are still actively working on the road. The rest have been evacuated, transferred, killed, or rotated home. The 45th Engineer Regiment, which began with 1,200 men, now has 287 original members. The turnover has been almost complete, a casualty rate of over 75% when you count disease and injury. Enough, Hayes says. Enough made it to finish the job. Williams nods. That's something, I guess. That we finished it. Yes, Hayes says. That's something. January 27, 1945. Mile 478. Mongyu, Burma. The convoy reaches Mongyu at 2:34 p.m., exactly 8 days after leaving Ledo. There's 17 trucks, now 15 more have broken down along the route, victims of the road's brutal conditions. But 17 trucks carrying 61 tons of cargo have made it all the way from India to the Burma Road terminus. Walsh climbs out of his jeep and looks at the junction ahead where the Ledo Road meets the old Burma Road, the route that once connected Burma to Kunming before the Japanese cut it in 1942. Chinese engineers have been working to repair the Burma Road section, and now the two roads are one continuous line, 1,079 miles from Ledo to Kunming. General Sultan is here, having flown in for the ceremony. So is Colonel Pick. So are representatives from the Chinese Army, the British forces, and the American press corps who've been covering the road's construction with a mixture of admiration and skepticism. Sultan makes a speech about Allied cooperation and engineering triumph. Pick stands silently, remembering every mile, every casualty, every impossible problem they somehow solved. When Sultan finishes, he calls Pick forward. Colonel Pick, Sultan says, by order of the War Department and with the authority of the President of the United States, the Ledo Road is hereby officially designated the Stilwell Road, in honor of General Joseph W. Stilwell, whose vision and determination made this achievement possible. There's applause, and Pick shakes Sultan's hand, but is thinking about the names that should really be attached to this road. Private Tucker, killed by Japanese fire at mile 72. Lieutenant Morrison, who died of cerebral malaria at mile 189. Sergeant Phillips, crushed by a falling tree at mile 301. Private Washington, who lost his leg. Corporal Williams, who lost his mobility. The 1,073 men who lost their lives. This isn't Stilwell's road, Pick thinks. It's theirs. The men who bled for it, died for it, gave pieces of themselves to it. This is their monument, even if their names are never carved into stone. February 4, 1945. Kunming, China. The convoy now reduced to 13 trucks after the Burma Road section claimed 4 more vehicles to mechanical failure rolls into Kunming to a hero's welcome. Chinese civilians line the streets, waving flags, cheering. To them, these trucks represent survival. For 3 years, since the fall of Burma, China has been slowly strangling. The air supply over the hump kept them alive, but barely. Now there's a road. Now supplies can flow by the ton, by the convoy, by the thousands of trucks that will follow. Henderson sits in his truck, overwhelmed by the reception. He's 21 years old now, though he feels 40. He's survived malaria 3 times, dysentery twice, and more close calls with death than he can count. He's watched friends die, watched the jungle try to reclaim every mile they built, watched the best engineering project of his generation consume men like fuel. But he's here, in China, delivering supplies that might help win this war. A Chinese general approaches the convoy, accompanied by American liaison officers. Through a translator, he thanks the drivers personally, shaking each man's hand. When he reaches Henderson, he pauses. "You built the road?" he asks through the translator. "Yes, sir," Henderson says. Me and about 15,000 others. Many died. Henderson nods. Yes, sir. Many died. The general is quiet for a moment, then says something in Chinese. The translator hesitates, then says, "The general says that in China, we have a saying, a road built with blood never washes away. He says your road, and the men who died building it, will be remembered for 1,000 years." Henderson doesn't know what to say to that. 1,000 years seems impossible to imagine when you're 21 and standing in mud that's identical to the mud you stood in 2 years ago in India. But he nods, accepts the general's handshake, and hopes it's true. Hopes that somehow, all those graves back along the road mean something beyond just the strategic calculus of tonnage and supply lines. March 15, 1945. Ledo Base Camp, After Action Report. Colonel Pick sits in his Office A real office now, in a real building, not a tent, and writes his final report on the Ledo Road project. The statistics are staggering. Length, 478 miles, Ledo to Mongyu Junction. Construction time, 27 months, January 1943 to January 1945. Personnel, peak strength of 28,000 men, engineers, infantry, support. Casualties, 1,073 killed in action, died of disease, 1,234 evacuated permanently. Cost, $150 million, approximately $2.6 billion in 2025 dollars. Cost per mile, $314,000, $5.4 million in 2025 dollars. Bridges built, 164. Culverts installed, 8,294. Earth moved, 13.5 million cubic yards. Corduroy road laid, 27 miles. Average construction rate, 0.6 miles per day. He includes in his report something that won't make it into the official histories, the human cost that can't be measured in statistics. The marriages that failed because men came home broken. The minds shattered by 2 years in conditions that would break most people in 2 months. The bodies ravaged by diseases that will haunt these men for the rest of their lives, malaria recurring every few years, tropical infections that never quite heal, lungs scarred by fungal infections, kidneys damaged by repeated bouts of fever. Pick writes, the Ledo Road was built at enormous cost in lives and resources. Whether this cost was justified depends on perspective that only history can provide. Strategically, the road achieved its primary objective, reopening land supply routes to China. Tactically, it demonstrated that American engineering could overcome obstacles previously considered insurmountable. Personally, as the officer responsible for its construction, I will forever question whether the cost was proportionate to the benefit. He doesn't include his final thought, the one that keeps him awake at night, that the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Japan surrendered in August, and by September the Ledo Road's strategic importance had already begun to fade. Within a year, it would be abandoned, the jungle beginning its work of reclamation. Within a decade, large sections would be impassable again. 1,073 men died to build a road that was critical for less than 6 months. But Pick also knows something else. Those men didn't die for a road. They died doing their duty, serving their country, attempting the impossible because their nation asked it of them. The road was just the mission. The sacrifice was the meaning. April 30th, 1945. Walter Reed Hospital, Washington, D.C. Private Henderson, now Sergeant Henderson by virtue of battlefield promotions, sits in a hospital bed in Washington, being treated for his 4th recurrence of malaria. He's been home for 6 weeks, and he's still not sure America is real. The beds are too soft. The food is too plentiful. Nobody is trying to kill him, and it feels wrong. A reporter from the Washington Post comes to interview him about the Ledo Road. The reporter is young, enthusiastic, hasn't seen combat. He asks questions about engineering challenges and strategic importance, and Henderson answers them automatically, but is thinking about other things. What do you want people to know about the road? The reporter finally asks. Henderson thinks about that. About the men who didn't come home. About the graves stretching back 478 miles across jungle and mountain. About the blood and mud and malaria and the sheer, grinding determination it took to keep moving forward when everything, the weather, the terrain, the disease, the enemy was trying to stop them. I want them to know it cost us, Henderson says finally. I want them to know we paid for every mile. And I want them to know we'd do it again, because that's what soldiers do. We build roads through hell if that's what's needed. Even if the road doesn't last forever, even if people forget it was there, we built it. And that matters. The reporter writes it down, but Henderson can see he doesn't really understand. How could he? You had to be there. You had to feel the rain that never stopped, the mud that had no bottom, the fever that burned through your brain. You had to watch your friends die from diseases you couldn't pronounce. You had to keep working when everything in you screamed to stop. You had to be one of the men who built the road through the impossible jungle. And Henderson was. They all were. The thousands of men, mostly African American engineers, who turned the British impossible into American accomplished. Who took the man-a-mile road and walked it, built it, conquered it, at a cost that would haunt them forever but which they paid without hesitation. In the end, that's the story of the Ledo Road. Not the engineering triumph, not the strategic importance, but the human cost and the human determination that built something impossible because the alternative was accepting defeat. They built a road through hell. And they did it knowing the price. And they paid it, 1 man per mile, sometimes more, until the road reached China and broke the blockade that was strangling an ally. That's what matters. That's what should be remembered. That's the story of the Ledo Road.